Thank you guys for showing up here tonight. What a great turnout. I didn't expect that. I hope you have got ham sandwiches. I'd like to welcome you all to Goose Creek Friends meeting. My name is Alan Cochran. I'm the president of the Loudoun Preservation Society. I'm also a member here at the Goose Creek Friends meeting. I grew up right across the road, and my daddy grew up right across the road. In fact, tonight, my mother and father have been taking care of the meeting for, it'll be 61 years this October. Mom's back here in the back. We've been here long enough to almost remember what we're going to talk about tonight.
Boo.
Really excited to have you. A few housekeeping things. Make yourself at home. Make yourself comfortable. Right through these doors here and through the next door down are our restrooms, left and right. Help yourself as needed. So we want to, get into this 1776 mode tonight. So turn off your cell phones. We didn't have them back then. So. The Goose Creek Friends have been meeting here for 186 years. So I think we're going to be here this Sunday coming up. So we'd love to see you guys if you want to come out and visit with us and worship with us. We'd love to have you. The Friends Meeting House here is the home base right now for the Loudoun Preservation Society. We meet here once a month. And our goal, our mission is to promote preservation in Loudoun County through a series of events like tonight and through tours. We have those occasionally. But our main gig is our grants program. So if anyone knows, our grants program is open right now. Applications are online. So if anyone knows a 501 or a non-charitable organization that needs help getting started, maybe we can get you headed in the right direction. There's a little donation box in the back. So put all your money in there. Leave your credit card numbers and all that. So sit back, relax, make yourself comfortable, enjoy the night.
I'm Tracy Gillespie. I'm one of the founding members of the Loudoun Virginia250 Committee. I don't know how many of you have heard about the Virginia250 Committee. We are one of the earlier ones that was formed in the Commonwealth, and we've been in existence now for over 3 years. And we've had how many? 116 programs in the last 3 years in the community. This is number 117 tonight. Tomorrow evening, we do really wide-ranging things. Tomorrow evening at Cochran Creek Distillery, we're going to do a program there. So go online and look at that. And we're going to look at the history of cocktails as a part of the And there are still tickets available. So we have these booklets available back where the food is, and please take one or more than one if you don't have one. This is a booklet that was written by members of our committee, led by Rich Gillespie, and it's about Loudoun County during the American Revolution. I hope you'll take a look at it. It's a nice little guide to you. And if you go on loudonva250.org, loudonva250.org, you'll find our calendar events coming up for the next few months and other information like that. And hope that you can come out and help us commemorate the founding of our nation, the history of the American Revolution, and all things about it, and also how we have been going forward from there to continue to form our more perfect union. So thank you all for coming this evening.
Thanks, Tracy. I'm Nate Epling. I'm an attender here at Goose Creek monthly meeting. Been since my family moved back to the area 4 or 5 years ago now. And I'm a native of Western Loudoun. I find that to be a little rare amongst the dads and moms that I hang out with on the sidelines of practice or at school events. Being that I drove through this town for years and pandemic, my family was looking for a new community to get involved with, and we had planned to go into here and to a few other spots. Something about opening that door, the smell in the air, fire crackling. It got us. It got us. So we've been coming here ever since. I do really also want to emphasize to invite you all to come out any Sunday, 9:45. It's a great hour of silence. We've got kids. Can't work for money. I'll put money in there. But how did we get here? How did this meeting house get built? Where did Quakers come from? And what does Thomas Paine's common sense have to do with Quakers? Well, the Quakers of Loudoun came from the north. Quakerism was founded in the 1600s in England, Midlands of England, and then they came over to the New World, settled largely in the Philadelphia area. Famously, William Penn is a Quaker, founded Pennsylvania colony. Pennsylvania soon became a bustling port city, major city. Quakers were finding less and less farmable land for subsequent heirs, and they started looking for new places to go. And they found Loudoun as they were kind of coming south from Bucks County area and counties around there into Maryland and across the Potomac into Loudoun. They found very similar soils. They found sycamores and black oaks, I think, these trees that any farmers at the time could recognize were indicators of good, fertile soil to grow crops. These were mostly small family farms, not large plantation-style farms. But they were also here out competing the Germans, who had got here about the same time and settled right there up in the northern part of the county, Lovettsville. South end of the county, the English had come upriver to find more land for their larger plantations for tobacco and cotton that just needed more and more space and flat terrain. They found that in eastern Loudoun and also the southwestern part, west of Middleburg. So the Quakers took what's left, which is kind of the middle part, and established a meeting in what was just a wilderness of what we call now Waterford, Virginia. Who's here been to Waterford? Have many of you traveled through? It is an amazing town, kind of locked in history due to, well, a lot of things the Quakers ended up doing, but and some fascinating history there with a great foundation running and keeping that town alive for its kind of new rebirth. But those Fairfax Quakers kept expanding as more families came down from the Philadelphia area looking for more room. There was a family of Jannies. You're going to hear the name Janny a lot, and if you around Waterford and around this area. And there was one particular Quaker named Hannah Janney. She, as the legend says, sat on a log down by the creek twice a week in silent devotion. She felt a presence, and from her spiritual leanings formed the meeting that's here today. It was a time of the Revolution, what they call a preparatory meeting, not a full monthly meeting. It was what we call a church. And that preparatory meeting at the time of the Revolution started to grow. Other meetings were also formed in The Gap, Hillsborough, and South Fork, near Unison, or Union at the time. So what if you were a Quaker listening to what we're going to hear tonight? One of the major spiritual leadings of Quakers is their peace testimony. And that's more than just pacifism. I've come to learn, peace starts within, peace starts near you. But it is also a vocal ministry against war and violence. And that is no longer, not least complicated and divisive in times of national emergency, or as recorded in the minutes of the Waterford Fairfax monthly meeting, times of, they refer to the revolution as spirit of the times, people getting caught up in it. There are few mentions of Quaker members being counseled because they have mustered with a unit joining the revolution here in Loudoun. Some of them would not return to say Quaker. They would move on in their religious adventures. Others would. They would renounce the fact that they mustered. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. Got caught up in it. Which really says something for what was going on, right? You're a Quaker. You from birth, you sit in these pews and you sit in silence and you hear the testimonies and get caught up in the moment of grabbing a gun. Another interesting thing happened in 1776. The Philadelphia Yearly Meeting, which is kind of like a diocese for Quaker meetings. It's a broader regional group that helps communicating amongst the meetings. They effectively banned slavery in 1776 for Quakers, for Friends, and owning of slaves. The banning of renting slaves, which was a practice, wouldn't come till later. But nobody knew how slavery was going to come toward the, as the revolution began, on a national sense. But the Quakers had made their decision. And there were a lot of angst around keeping members in the writings of members and working with their meetings. I did want to read, for those that were taken away to war, there's an interesting quote, which I think part of this quote was actually in the recent Ken Burns documentary, so you might find it familiar for all you history nerds. Joe Nichols has Captain Snicker. This is from, by the way, Ye Meeting House Small. It's a little book about the history of this meeting house and the Quakers of Loudoun. Joe Nichols has Captain Snickers marching his reluctant ragtag band of Loudoun Quakers up to Valley Forge and presenting them to Washington with the comment, "They swear they will not fight." To which the general, quoting a witticism known since at least 1694, replied that Quakers will neither swear nor fight, and sends them home to work their farms. Lastly, get in that thought of, if you were a Quaker then, the book kind of ends on this with an interesting note. The simple times we have been recording only seem simple to us today. They were not such to those upon the scene. The challenges of our own naughty world to the dignity of man, to mutual understanding, to social justice, to peace, and to man's relationship with his God is no more than friends of Goose Creek in their respective times have faced through the years.
I'm Rich Gillespie. If you hate this program, blame me. I thought it might be a good idea. Common sense is one of those things that you memorize the name of. Probably forget the first name of the guy who wrote it. It was Thomas Paine. Here in Loudoun, you think Paine, you think Paine's Bar and Grill, better here than across the street. This guy was not from there. He was English. And he had been urged to leaving because of his rather radical sentiments and to head to Philadelphia, which, as you know, will become the capital of the revolutionary movement. When he gets to Philadelphia, the times are such that one of the best known of our Sons of Liberty, a fellow by the name of Dr. Benjamin Rush, whose diary is inevitably quoted, I think it got quoted like 70 times in the recent Ken Burns Revolution series, but he suggests that there might be some good work that a radical thinker, a clear radical thinker, a man with persuasive argument could do. Rush would later recall, I called upon Mr. Paine and I suggested to him the propriety of preparing our citizens for a perpetual separation of our country from Great Britain by means of a work of such length that would obviate all the objections to it. He seized the idea with great avidity. Yeah, well, so he got to work. Not necessarily in a garret room like Mr. Jefferson some months later, but in November, December, into very early January, 1775, 76, he's writing. Let's step aside for a minute. For those of you who do not have the chronology of the American Revolution branded into your brain, let's review a few things. The war breaks out formally at Lexington and Concord, April the 19th, 1775, a year ago, so to speak, given our 250 scale. Shortly after that, the governor of Virginia, on April the 21st, orders seizure of powder in Virginia. Thousands of Virginians flocked to Fredericksburg to march on the royal capital. The revolutionary fervor is not just alive among the well-armed militias and minute companies of Massachusetts, Connecticut, New Hampshire, Maine, Rhode Island. It is also alive down here. We here in Loudoun County have had independent militia companies since November of 1774. Independent, extra, outside, legal, the law. That's what we're doing. We have the regular militia, but the governor hasn't called the legislature in since the spring of 1774. That means that our regular militia is essentially non-functioning because there's no money for it. So now these independent companies, who's paying for them? Wherever they can get the money. George Washington paid for an entire company at Fairfax Company and uniformed them and gave them weapons. Okay? But once the war breaks out, by that summer of 1775, we are now forming in Virginia militarily in three ways. One, we begin to arm our militia companies without the royal governor's or the king's approval. So our militia companies are all minute companies, I should say independent companies, that's the word I want to use. We also set up minute companies. They were companies of militia that were better armed, better trained, and ready to respond more immediately for longer service. Many of them even had not only muskets, but bayonets, those knives on the end of your weapons. And thirdly, we began to form two regiments to send to a new Continental Army that was forming up at Cambridge and outside of Boston to lay siege to the British there, George Washington's army. If you come into January, when Mr. Paine is finishing his document, there are now 10,000 troops around Boston. They have been there since April, so that's some 8 months. And we've also had a defeat of the British Army at Norfolk here in Virginia. In addition, we've sent an army up against both Montreal and Quebec in Canada. Didn't work. It was a bit of a disaster. But the fact that we could get an army armed and all the way up there says something. And by January, one other thing. Our former beloved royal governor, we even had a Dunmore County named for him. We quickly changed the name of it after he did what I'm about to describe. It's now Shenandoah County, over there below Winchester. Dunmore declared on November 7th, 1775, anyone who was not going to rally to the royal standard was a traitor guilty of treason and punishable by all appropriate law. And one other little thing. Any enslaved person who would rally to the banner would receive their freedom. We're the biggest slave state, or slave colony, if you will. And we're terrified of that. Even Quakers are terrified of that. What does it mean if the slaves who would rally behind the crown would then be fighting their former masters a very unsettled time? It was 9 days after Common Sense was released in January 1776 that 47-page pamphlet with its many arguments for independence arrived here in this county. Wait a minute. We're saying it was so important that whatever it was so radical and revolutionary that 9 days later, by foot and horseback, that arrived at our county seat in Leesburg. There was an Englishman who had come over to America sort of as his post-college exploration. You remember, some of you who are old enough to have graduated from college probably remember you had friends. You probably went to work. They were the ones that got to go to Europe or somewhere like that. Nicholas Cresswell came to America. He had 2 goals. See if there was any good land that he might be able to manage. He was from Derbyshire, outside of Manchester, and the land was a bit short there. And the other thing is, he wanted to see a buffalo. First day of the American Revolution, he's out in God knows where on the Ohio River, and he and friends shoot a buffalo. So we got to see it. So April 19th was a good day for him. He's a little bit shocked when he gets back here. So he's keeping a diary, and he writes avidly about what he sees. This is what he said when Common Sense arrived. A pamphlet called Common Sense makes great noise. One of the vilest things that ever was published to the world. Full of false representations, lies, and treason, whose principles are to subvert all kingly governments and erect an independence republic. I believe the writer to be some Yankee Presbyterian, member of the Congress, as they call it. The sentiments are adopted by a great number of people hereabouts. So, it got around. Not everybody had a copy, but copies would go from tavern to tavern. There were 3 ordinaries right there in Leesburg. There were others out on the highways. And also, how did people here convey feeling? You went to a meeting or church, and you stood under the trees before the service because you probably didn't have a watch. Some of them didn't even have clocks, so you always got there early so you wouldn't miss the service, and you talked. And if anybody had heard this pamphlet, or they could get their hands on this thing, 120,000 copies of that little baby went out. They were cheap. They looked, if you've ever seen the old Farmer's Almanac, used to sell it up at Nichols Hardware. It's about like that, maybe a little bit smaller. It's a pamphlet, 47 pages. But good Lord, those arguments would be argued here. So when it came up, the possibility that working with the Loudoun Virginia250 Committee, we could put on Common Sense for you as a very simple, straight up set of arguments to be read in simply. We wanted to do it in a historic place and with a kind of snarky, ironic attitude that we have in 2026. We said, what a weird place to do it. It would be if we were to do it at the Quaker meeting. Now mind you, Goose Creek Quakers are meeting across the street. Okay, that is the original 1765 meeting house. This one, as the meeting had grown, replaced it in 1817. But that said, the irony of reading that in a place where those people would have heard about it, were the most literate people in the community, would have been standing out here arguing about it, seems to me to be too good not to do it. So, we will do it. We've broken it up for you in 32 sections. I went through with my little red pen. Some of you were my students and remember that devilish thing. And decided that there were parts that he could have done without saying because they just confuse everybody. So we've shortened it, so it's about 90% of the original. And we've divided it for readings by 32 readers. Oh, we decided that's a little bit too many. So we're going to go to 8 readers. Each will have 4 parts. The other thing is, some of you were with me, members of Loudoun Valley's infinitely memorable organization, the History Club. which we were going to have a really good name, but somewhere around 50 years ago, we forgot to name it, so it just became a history club because we didn't call it anything. And what we learned to do is, if you want to get a point across, read it aloud antiphonally. And the idea is that if we have a reader over here, the next reader is going to be over here. And then the next reader may be over here, and then over here, and the voices bounce around. They'll stand, and here's where you come in. How do you respond to that argument? So imagine you're one of those people that's standing there, listening to some blowhard talking about Paine's arguments, and he's just made one, read it out of the pamphlet. How would you respond?
So say you.
Yeah. Or huzzah! Or what else could we say that's 18th century-ish?
Hear, hear.
Hear, hear. Sure. And what if you really like it? Stomp your feet. Don't do it too high. We don't want the building to collapse. It's happened fairly well these last several years. 200. But what if you don't like the argument? I dare you. Stand up and shout and yell, "Nay, treason!" Something. And you can be creative. We are in a place of worship. It's a spiritual place. Probably curtail the words that are inappropriate in your language. You may not get the hang of this right away, so you will see some of the other readers help you along by doing this. As we hear our first few readers, might be silent, and then you'll hear some other people start to chime in. We then got to have refreshments. This takes, the last 2 times we've done it 35 minutes. And then we'll have refreshments, and for those of you who have a little bit of time, and this in some way touched you, we're going to reconvene in here to talk about it. We have a few questions that sort of open up the audience's thoughts on this, and the idea of reading it aloud as it would have been read in taverns and outside churches in those days of the winter and spring of 1776. Just so you know, we're coming up as Virginians on a major anniversary. On May 15th, the 5th Virginia Convention. They started meeting in the summer of 1774. We're now up to number 5, convening of Virginian representatives. Loudoun sent 3 to this meeting, had to decide if we would move to the next time all the colonies were going to meet, which would be in the Second Continental Congress. Actually, at that point, it was just the Continental Congress. They weren't numbering them because they met periodically. We got to move that we recommend independence. And our third, 5th, but you see why we don't number them? The 5th Virginia Convention will vote unanimously to recommend independence to everyone else and to establish a committee to be chaired by one Mr. Mason, George Mason, to write a Virginia Declaration of Rights, which is the first such thing. If you've never read it, it is at least as powerful, if not more so, than the United States Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments of the Constitution. So, you know what to do. We know what to do. I'm going to sit down and turn things over just a moment. Give you another word.
My friends, the sentiments presented here tonight are perhaps not yet sufficiently fashionable to procure them general favor. A long habit of not thinking a thing wrong gives it superficial appearance of being right and raises at first a formidable outcry in defense of custom. But the tumult soon subsides. Time makes more converts than reason. As long and violent abuse of power is generally the means of calling the right of it in question, and in matters to which might never have been thought of had not sufferers been aggravated into inquiry, and as the King of England hath undertaken in his own right to support the Parliament in which he calls theirs, and as the good people of this country are grievously oppressed by the combination, they have an undoubted privilege to inquire into the pretensions of both, and equally to reject the usurpations of either.
Surely.
The cause of America is in great measure the cause of all mankind. Many circumstances have and will arise which are not local but universal, through which the principles of all lovers of mankind are affected, and in the event of which their affections are interested. The laying of a country desolate with fire and sword, declaring war against the natural rights of all mankind, and extirpating the defenders thereof from the face of the earth is the concern of every man.
Huzzah!
Society in every state is a blessing, but government, even in its best state, is but a necessary evil. In its worst state, an intolerable one. For when we suffer the same miseries by a government which we might expect a country without government, our calamity is heightened by reflecting that we furnish the means by which we suffer. Wherefore, security being the true design and the end of government, it unanswerably follows that whatever form thereof appears most likely to ensure it, with the least expense and the greatest benefit, is preferable to all others.
The prejudice of Englishmen in favor of their own government by king, lords, and commons arises as much or more from national pride than reason. Individuals are undoubtedly safer in England than in other countries, but the will of the king is as much the law of the land in Britain as in France, with this difference, that instead of proceeding directly from his mouth, it is handed to the people under the more formidable shape of an act of parliament. For the fate of Charles I hath only made kings more subtle, not more just.
In the early ages of the world, according to the scripture chronology, there were no kings, the consequence of which was there were no wars. It is the pride of kings which throw mankind into confusion. Holland without a king hath enjoyed more peace for this last century than any of the monarchical governments in Europe. Government by kings was first introduced into the world by the heathens, from whom the children of Israel copied the custom. It was the most prosperous invention the devil ever set on foot for the promotion of idolatry. The heathens paid divine honors to their deceased kings, and the Christian world hath improved on the plan by doing the same to their living ones. How impious is the title of sacred majesty applied to a worm who in the midst of his splendor is crumbling into dust.
To the evil of monarchy, we have added that of hereditary succession. And as the first is a degradation and lessening of ourselves, so the second, claimed as a matter of right, is an insult and an imposition on posterity. For all men, being originally equals, no one by birth could have a right to set up his own family in perpetual preference to all others forever. Though himself might deserve some decent degree of honors of his contemporaries, his descendants might be far too unworthy to inherit them. One of the strongest natural proofs of the folly of hereditary right in kings is that nature disproves it. Otherwise, she would not so frequently turn it into ridicule by giving mankind an ass for a lion.
Oh, yes.
Supposing the present race of kings in the world world to have had an honorable origin, whereas it is more than probable that we could take off the dark covering of antiquity and trace them to their first rise, that we should find the first of them nothing better than the principal ruffian of a restless gang, whose savage manners or preeminence in subtlety obtained him the title of chief among plunderers, and who, by increasing in power and extending his depredations, overawed the quiet and defenseless to purchase their safety by frequent contributions. Yet his choices could have no idea of giving hereditary right to his descendants, because such a perpetual exclusion of themselves was incompatible with the free and unrestrained principles they professed to live by. Wherefore, hereditary succession in the early ages of monarchy could not take place as a matter of claim. As few or no records were extant in those days, and traditionary history stuffed with fables, it was very easy, after the lapse of a few generations, to trump up some superstitious tale, conveniently timed, to cram hereditary right down the throats of the vulgar. And what at first was submitted to as a convenience was afterwards claimed as a right.
England, since the conquest, had known no few good monarchs, but grown beneath a much larger number of bad ones. Yet no man in his senses can say that claim under William the Conqueror is a very honorable one. A French bastard landing with an armed batiti, and establishing himself as King of England against the consent of his natives, in his plain terms, is very paltry, rascally, original. It certainly hath no divinity in it.
It is not so much the absurdity as the evil of hereditary succession which concerns mankind. Did it ensure a race of good and wise men, it would have been the seal of divine authority. But as it opens the door to the foolish, the wicked, and the improper, it hath the nature of oppression. Men who look upon themselves born to reign and others to obey soon grow insolent.
Another evil which attends hereditary succession is that the throne is subject to be possessed by a minor at any age, all which time the regency, acting under the cover of this king, have every opportunity and inducement to betray their trust. The same national misfortune happens when a king, worn out with age and infirmity, enters the last stage of human weakness. In both these cases, the public becomes a prey to every miscreant who can tamper successfully with the follies either of age or infancy.
The most plausible plea which hath ever been offered in favor of hereditary succession is that it preserves a nation from civil wars. And were this true, it would be weighty, whereas the most bare-faced falsity ever imposed upon mankind. The whole of England disowns the fact. 30 kings and 2 minors have reigned in that distracted kingdom since the conquest, in which time there have been, including the Revolution, no less than 8 civil wars and 19 rebellions.
The nearer any government approaches to a republic, the less business there is for a king. It is somewhat difficult to find a proper name for the current government of England. Sir William Meredith calls it a republic, but in its present state, it is unworthy of the name, because the corrupt influence of the crown, by having all the places in its disposal, has so effectually swallowed up the power and eaten out the virtue of the House of Commons, the Republican part in the Constitution, that the government of England as monarchical as that of France or Spain.
Huzzah! The sun never shine on a cause of greater worth. 'Tis not the affair of a city, a country, a province, or a kingdom, but of a continent, of at least 1/8 part of the habitable globe, 'tis not the concern of a day, a year, or an age. Posterity are virtually involved in the contest, and will be more or less affected, even to the end of time, by the proceedings now. Now is the seed time of continental union, faith, and honor. By referring the matter from arguments to arms, a new era for politics is struck. A new method of thinking hath arisen. All plans, proposals, etc., prior to the 19th of April, i.e. to the commencement of hostilities, are like the almanacs of the last year, which, though proper then, are superseded and useless now. Whatever was advanced by the advocates on either side of the question then terminated in one and the same point, viz. A union with Great Britain. The only difference between the parties was the method of effecting it. The one proposing force, the other friendship. But it hath so far happened that the first hath failed, and the second hath withdrawn her influence.
In England, a king hath little more to do than make war and give away places, which in plain terms is to impoverish the nation and set it together by the ears. A pretty business indeed for a man to be allowed 800,000 pounds sterling for a year for and worshipped in the bargain. Of more worth is one honest man to society and in the sight of God than all the crowned ruffians that ever lived.
Down with the monarchy!
It has been asserted by some that as America hath flourished under her former connection with Great Britain, that the same connection is necessary towards her future happiness. Nothing can be more fallacious than this kind of argument. We may as well assert that because the child has thrived upon milk, that it is never to have meat. Or that the first 20 years of our lives is to become a precedent for the next 20. America would have flourished as much, and probably much more, had Britain had nothing to do with her. The commerce by which she hath enriched herself are the necessaries of life, and will always have a market, while eating is the custom of Europe. Our corn will fetch its price in any market in Europe, and our imported goods must be paid for by them where we will.
But she has protected us, some say, and she hath engrossed us in true and defended our continent at our expense as well as at her own is admitted. And she would have defended Turkey from the same motive, viz. The sake of trade and dominion. Alas, we have been long led away by ancient prejudices and made large sacrifices to superstition. We have boasted the protection of Great Britain without considering what her motive was interest, not attachment, that she did not protect us from our enemies on our account, but from her enemies on her account.
Yes. But Britain is the parent company, some say. Then the more shame upon her. Even brutes do not devour their young, nor savage make war on their own families.
Any submission to or dependence on Great Britain tends directly to involve this continent in European wars and quarrels, and sets us at variance with nations who would otherwise seek our friendship, and against whom we have neither anger nor complaint. As Europe is our market for trade, we ought to form no partial connection with any part of it. It is the true interest of America to steer clear of European contentions, which she can never do while by her dependence on Britain. She has made the make-weight in the scale on British politics. Europe is too thickly planted with kingdoms to be long at peace. And whenever a war breaks out between England and any foreign power, the trade of America goes to ruin because of her connection with Britain.
Everything that is right or natural pleads for separation. The blood of the slain, the weeping voice of nature cries, "'Tis time to part." Even the distance at which the Almighty hath placed England and America is a strong and natural proof that the authority of one over the other was never the design of heaven.
One is inclined to believe that all those who espouse the doctrine of reconciliation may be included within the following descriptions: interested men who are not to be trusted, weak men who cannot see, prejudiced men who will not see, and a certain set of moderate men who think better of the European world than it deserves. And this last class, by any ill-judged deliberation, will be the cause of more calamities to this continent than all the other three.
It is the good fortune of many to live distant from the scene of sorrow. The evil is not sufficiently brought to their doors to make them feel the precariousness with which all American property is possessed. But let our imaginations transport us for a few moments to Boston. That seat of wretchedness will teach us wisdom and instruct us forever to renounce a power in whom we can have no trust. The inhabitants of that unfortunate city, who but for a few months ago were in ease and affluence, have now no other alternative than to stay and starve or turn out to beg. They are endangered by the fire of their friends if they continue within the city, and plundered by the soldiery if they leave it.
Men of passive tempers look somewhat lightly over the offenses of Britain, and still hoping for the best, are apt to call out, "Come, come, we shall be friends again after all, for all this." But examine the passions and feelings of mankind, bring the doctrine of reconciliation to the touchstone of nature, and then tell me whether you can hereafter love, honor, and faithfully serve the power that hath carried fire and sword into your land.
The object contended for ought always to bear some just proportion to the expense. The removal of Lord North or the whole detestable junta is a matter unworthy the millions we have expended. If the whole continent must take up arms, if every man must be a soldier, it is scarcely worth our while to fight against a contemptible ministry only. Dearly, dearly, do we pay for the repeal of the acts if that is all we fight for?
No man was a warmer wisher for reconciliation. With the fatal 19th of April, 1775, the moment of event that day made known, we rejected the hardened, sullen-tempered Pharaoh of England forever, and disdained the wretch that with pretended father of this people can unfeelingly hear of their slaughter and composedly sleep with their blood upon his soul.
If the powers governing still remain in the hands of the king, he will have a negative over the whole legislation in this continent. And he hath shown himself such an enemy to liberty and discovered such a thirst for arbitrary power. Is he or is he not a proper man to say to these colonies, "You shall make no laws but what I please"?
America is only a secondary object in the system of British politics. England consults the good of this country no further than it answers her own purpose. Wherefore, her own interest leads her to suppress the growth of ours in every case which doth not promote her advantage, or in the least interferes with it.
Yes.
A government of our own is our natural right. Nothing but independence, i.e. a continental form of government, can keep the peace of this continent and preserve it inviolate from civil wars. When a man seriously reflects on the precariousness of human affairs, he will become convinced that it is infinitely wiser and safer to form a constitution of our own in a cool and deliberate manner while we have it in our power than to trust such an interesting event to time and chance.
But where would be the King of America? He remains above, and doth not make havoc of mankind like the royal brute of Britain, yet that he may not appear to be defective. In earthly honors, let a day be solemnly set apart for proclaiming the charter. Let it be brought forth, placed on the divine law, the word of God. Let a crown be placed thereupon by which the word may know that so far as we approve of monarchy, that in America, where the law is king.
It is not in numbers, but in unity that our great strength lies. Our present numbers are sufficient to repel the force of all the world. The continent hath, at this time, the largest body of armed and disciplined men of any power under heaven. It is just arrived at that pitch of strength in which no single colony is able to support itself, and the whole, when united, can accomplish the matter.
Nothing can settle our affairs so expeditiously as an open and determined declaration for independence. For it is unreasonable to suppose that France or Spain will give us any kind of assistance if we mean only to make use of that assistance for the purpose of repairing the breach and strengthening the connection between Britain and America, because those powers would be sufferers by the consequences. But if a manifesto were to be published and dispatched to foreign courts, setting forth the miseries we have endured and the peaceable methods we have ineffectually used for redress, declaring at the same time that not being able any longer to live happily or safely under the cruel disposition of the British court, we have been driven to the necessity of breaking off all connections with her. At the same time, assuring all such courts of our peaceable disposition towards them, and of our desire of entering into trade with them. Such a memorial would produce more good effects to this continent than if a ship were freighted with petitions to Britain. Under our present denomination as British subjects, we can neither be received nor heard abroad. The custom of all courts is against us and will be so until, by independence, we take rank with other nations.
We ought to reflect that there are 3 different ways by which independency may hereafter be effected, and that one of those 3 will one day or other be the fate of America, by the legal voice of the people in Congress, by a military power, or by a mob. Should an independency be brought about by the first of those means, we have every opportunity and every encouragement before us to form the noblest, purest constitution on the face of the earth. We have it in our power to begin the world over again. A situation similar to the present have now happened since the days of Noah until now. The birthday of a new world is at hand.
Yes.
The sun never shined on a cause of greater worth. 'Tis not the affair of a city, a country, a province, or a kingdom, but of a continent of at least 1/8 part of the habitable globe. 'Tis not the concern of the day, a year, or an age. posterity are virtually involved in the contest and will be more or less affected, even to the end of time, by the proceedings now. Now is the seed time of continental union, faith, and honor.
Join or die.
I'll bet you've heard many of those lines before. Borrowed 6 months later. They're in the Declaration of Independence. Because that's what we did. Our ideas were circulated, and the best of them then went into the great documents that the representatives in Congress could then sign on to. John Wayne once made the pithy observation, it's hard to be a patriot on an empty stomach. Our good president, foreseeing this difficulty, hath provided, and we will take a few minutes through the doors to use restrooms, to get drink, to get sustenance, and then we will call, and for those who would like to be a part of sharing what you thought, sharing some ideas, arguing a little bit of this out, we'll do that for 15 or 20 minutes and then call it a night. Thank you for coming. If you really do need to get home, please do that. We know you probably wanted to hear this part, but we also know that there seems to be a need to say, listening to that is not what I thought it might be. And the ideas that are put in there, they're compelling. Remember, I woke up this morning, passed on to my wife, a Royal Military Band playing Hail to the King. St. George's Day, patron saint of England. And I thought to myself, given that we were many people here, Germans, Scottish, Welsh, Irish, Scots, Irish, we were from all over, even the Germans weren't from the same places. All of those people as well as English, but nonetheless, in terms of our basic setup here, it was English. And for us to give that away is like you and I taking advantage of the new, easier ways to claim Canadian citizenship. And even though we may joke about that, think of how few of us will actually do that, even if we have nothing at all against Canada. It's hard to give up on what you are, and yet something had happened in that decade before this happened. This motley crew of people in places like the frontier, Loudoun County, with all these different nationalities, 8 different religions, several different races, all here together in the same place like a patchwork quilt, something had begun to percolate that said, it may be hard, it's what we gotta do. So, please imbibe and